Welcome, everyone. Hope you're having a good afternoon or evening if you're with us from Europe, or morning if you're with us from a different part of the world. I am Susan Lauer, Administrator of the Maharishi Vastu Office for North America. Jon Lipman, who is our National Director for Maharishi Vastu and Chief Vastu Architect for North America, will be giving a brief presentation on the unique features of a Maharishi Vastu home. And then we have a lot of questions from all over the world that have come in, either from your emails or from Facebook. And those we will be getting to, addressing and answering. Jon, would you like to begin?
Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us. So we're going to talk about some of the specific elements in Maharishi Vastu homes and larger buildings today. And then, of course, we're going to answer your questions. And before we talk about the specific elements, I'll take 1 minute to set the context for what these elements are. We know that Vastu comes from the ancient Vedic literature, from the text of Sthapatya Ved, and that it is a way of applying nature's own architectural principles to the design of our homes and cities, such that we can use real laws of nature, not a matter of placebo or belief, in order to have various nourishing influences upon the occupants of the buildings or cities. And that the literature describes to us that the influences include good health, happiness, family harmony, success, and growth to enlightenment. And that all of these can be understood to be expressions of what is happening on the most profound level, which is that this is a Vedic technology that allows for the alignment of our individual intelligence with cosmic intelligence, with that organizing intelligence responsible for displaying and maintaining all of nature. And today we're going to talk briefly about 3 elements of Maharishi Vastu homes that have particular influences on us. And we're going to look now at those elements, and I'll talk to you about them. The first element that we're going to talk about is an element of nature's own architecture, which is that when we look at the structures of nature from the very largest to the very smallest, we find that there is a certain parallel aspect to their architecture. And we want to share that with the architecture of our own buildings and cities. And it is that the structures of nature generally have a silent core, and the activity of the structure is arranged around that silent core. So in the upper right, we see a photograph of a galaxy. Next, we see on the upper right an example of a solar system, specifically our own solar system. And then lower left, we see an enhanced photograph or model of cells, which have a nucleus, the intelligence at the very center of the cell. And finally, lower right, we see a representation of an atom, which again is composed of a core, a nucleus around which electrons rotate. This silent core that we find throughout structures of nature, in Sanskrit, the language of the Ved, is called a Brahmastan, the word we see at the very bottom of the screen. Brahm means wholeness, stan means established. So it is the point at the core of a structure that establishes its wholeness. But from a cosmic perspective, there's a related aspect to it, which is that all of nature is permeated by and supported by a field of organizing intelligence, which expresses itself in the structures of nature. And in each case, generally, a structure of nature has a point, a silent core at its center, which serves as a junction point to maintain the relationship between that structure and the wholeness that permeates all of nature that is unmanifest. And so now let us look at how that principle can be applied as an analog in houses that we build. Well, first of all, in a Maharishi Vastu house, there is always a silent core. And if the house is large enough, it may be a central hall, as in this photograph. And if at all possible, it is flooded by sunlight from above, as well as from the east, west, north, and south. And on the floor, marking the center point, we have some representation of a square of precise dimensions. In this case, we see other forms of wood which outline a square, and then there's a design within it and a table upon it, which remind us of this principle of the silent core at the center of a structure, which is the connection between this environment and the cosmos. Above, once again, we see that oftentimes there will be clear stories or skylights that let sunlight stream down onto the central space. And ideally, and in a large enough yard with a large enough house, that core is actually outside. It's in a courtyard. Ankana is the Sanskrit term for that. And the house wraps around it. This is a true Brahmastan. But commonly, our houses are smaller, and it is represented by a square on the floor within the center of the core of the house. So this is one of the special elements of Vastu architecture as restored by Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. And here we see a really good example of this, in which there's a central space in a large house. And at the floor, in the middle of that central space, is marked this coherent center. Another element which is incorporated in Maharishi's system of Vastu, not in every other system that you will find throughout India, but a pattern which Maharishi, after conducting his 20 years of deep research into all of the patterns of Vastu or Sthapatya Veda as described in the ancient Vedic literature and as recalled by the living architects in the many different lineages of Vedic architecture across India, he concluded that an important pattern, extremely important pattern, is that each building, or in some cases small collections of buildings, be surrounded by a fence or a wall. And the fence or wall is square or rectangular. And it's called a Vastu fence or a Vastu wall. And what is its function? Well, multiple functions, one of which is that the system of measurement and proportion, which are one of the activating elements of Vastu that enliven the harmonious relationship between the parts and the whole, is extended outside of the house, well into the site, and delineated by the fence or the wall. A second element of it is that it is entered from the east, and in addition, it can be entered from the north. And this enhances the Eastern orientation of life within the house that's within this. And that's a very real, powerful thing, as we have learned anecdotally. And finally, what we understand from the tradition and what we seem to see in cases is that the fence or wall really is a kind of force of protection, that it reduces the influences, the incoherent influences of the natural world within the interior of the fenced enclosure. Now, this wall is certainly an expensive wall to build, and it is absolutely not necessary to spend this much money enclosing one's home. And so let's look at some other examples. Another wonderful way to enclose the house is with a fence which is partly a low wall with piers, either of brick or stucco perhaps, with metal fencing in between them, a very classy, stately, traditional form of fence. And as we move to more economical construction, the fence can certainly be built entirely of wood. And here's a really beautiful, very solid, ideal wood Vastu fence. Or We can go to the common traditional fences. We can call them picket fences as one example, that are used widely throughout the United States as another alternative. So these are some of the ways that the second element is included to create nourishing influences in Maharishi Vastu homes. A third element that everyone comments on when they see Maharishi Vastu homes is that almost always there's an ornament on the peak of the roof. And here we see a photograph of it. It has a Sanskrit name. That name is Kalash, and that word means vessel. And if you look closely at the shape, it looks, in fact, like a vessel with a lid sitting upon a base. Now, the kalash is described very precisely numerically with proportions in the Vedic literature. And kalashas have been a part of Vastu construction since time immemorial in India, the land of the Ved. And when Maharishi Mahesh Yogi spent so many years researching Vastu to ensure that the practice that he brought out to the world would be completely based in the Vedic literature, he spent quite a long time going carefully over the precise mathematical description of the kalash in the Vedic literature to ensure that the shape that we provide for Maharishi Vastu homes is the precise reflection of the laws of nature that are recorded in the Vedic literature. And we understand that a role that the kalash plays is that it serves as a junction point between the cosmos and the interior of the house. There is a more economical, more modest kind of finial that also can be used. Here are some examples of stupics, which are also Vedic forms, which are also used in kalashes instead of kalashes on the roofs of houses. And there are other possibilities. So that's my prepared remarks, a quick overview on Vastu fences and Brahmastans and the ornament on the roofs of Vastu houses. And now I'd like to turn it back over to Susan.
Good, John. We've actually had some questions come in even while you were talking, but let's get started with our list of questions. Does the shape of the home matter in Vastu? And how would a geodesic dome fit into Vastu?
The shape does matter. Because of the Earth's rotation from west to east, the sun rises overhead from east to west. All the cosmic bodies pass across the Earth from east to west, and their influences blanket the Earth with kind of invisible rays that run east to west. The other basic reality of the architecture of planet Earth is that because of its rotation, it rotates about an axis which runs through the north and south poles, and the relationship between them can be mapped on the surface of the Earth as kind of parallel lines, like the lines used to slice an orange, radiating out from the points, running north-south on the surface of the Earth. These north-south lines and these east-west lines are comparable to the lines of longitude and latitude that we see on a globe. And they represent, remember, the cosmic forces, the planetary forces that are a reality on the surface of planet Earth. And when we create a humanly made structure on the surface of planet Earth, creating an alteration to what was here naturally, we have a choice to construct it so that it is aligned with and harmonious with this grid of the forces on the surface of the Earth or not. And if we do the former, which of course is what we recommend, then what we are constructing is squares or rectangles as the floor plan of the house that are aligned with the cardinal directions facing north, south, east, west. Now, that doesn't mean that a Maharishi Vastu house has to be a simple square or rectangle. It can be a very complex shape, but it will be complex composed of a series of rectangular or square shapes in plan. And so now if we look at a geodesic dome, and probably all of you know what one is, but I'll give you a 1-minute description. This is a shape of shelter that was invented by Buckminster Fuller in the 1950s. And it looks like a hemisphere, either 3/8 of a sphere or 1/2 or 5/8. But instead of being a curved surface, curved in both axes, it is composed of flat facets. And a sphere is the most efficient way to enclose a space. And so in theory, a geodesic dome requires the least amount of enclosing material to enclose a building. And that and other reasons were reasons that caused Buckminster Fuller to find it to be such a promising shape. Where it hits the ground, its footprint is basically a circle, though broken into many facets. And because most of these facets do not align, this is not at all ideal from the perspective of Vastu. However, it is perfectly possible to have a dome on the roof above the walls of a Vastu building. And so in theory, a geodesic dome could be used above the walls of a house upon it.
Okay, here is a question actually that just came in on the fences, John. So I thought I'd read this one. Some text suggests that the height of the Vastu wall should be no more than the height of the window of the house. Is that the case with Maharishi Vastu?
No. There is a minimum and a maximum recommended height for the wall, but it does not directly relate to the height of the windowsills.
Good, thank you. Here's a question. How can one build to the cardinal directions on a plot that is not aligned to the cardinal directions?
Well, if the lot is large enough, it can certainly be done. The issues can be that if it's rotated too many degrees, if the front of the house is rotated too many degrees from the angle of the road, the house may look peculiar. And for that reason, we would certainly hesitate to build a Maharishi Vastu house on a small lot if the street is not quite close to running due north-south or east-west. We wouldn't want it to look odd. But other than that, as long as this lot is large enough, we can do it. But that is quite a stipulation, because if a lot is quite tight, it's not unusual to run into 60-foot, 50-foot, even 40-foot wide lots in single-family residential neighborhoods outside of large cities. If the lot is rotated 10 or 20 degrees from the cardinal directions, it hugely reduces the size of the house that can be built aligned with the cardinal directions. And this is one reason why we recommend always to our potential clients that before they buy a lot, they contact us at maharishivastu.org. And we have a process whereby we can help you to evaluate a lot and determine whether it's feasible, in fact, to get the house that you desire onto the lot. You must find that out before you buy the lot.
Good, thank you, John. This is a question that just came in. When constructing, there are specific measurements, very precise measurements, but since the walls are not prefabricated and not coming from a mold, there could appear sometimes from different points of the wall, from one side to another, a slight difference in measurements. Is this a problem?
You are referring, of course, to the fact that measurements and proportions are one of the valuable organizing elements of creating the nourishing effects of Vastu houses. The instruction on achieving that is very simple. If you work with us, if you engage us, I will speak directly to your builder before you hire the builder And I'll go over with them in a very simple and friendly way how to build to satisfy the Vastu requirements. And I make this very user friendly. And I think every builder I have spoken to has concluded at the end of the call that they can do this. They really can. And we have instructions for how to frame accurately and how to lay up concrete accurately. And none of it entails anything out of the ordinary for any good builder. And if once they follow these simple practices, there is some small variation in the true of a wall, probably it's going to be fine.
Okay, here is another question that just came in, even related to the Brahmastans that you were showing us in those beautiful pictures. If you are a musician or have children, a Vastu house that is open in the floor between the first and the second can be noisy. But he said, I am happy to see a solution with a Brahmastan outside the house. Would you like to comment on that, John?
It is certainly true that if there is no communication between the first floor and the bedroom floor above, that sounds are isolated between the floors of the house. And that is a reason why it's lovely to have an outdoor Brahmastan, though not the only reason. But bringing sunlight down from above in a multi-story building is a recommendation, but it's not necessary to get the great predominance of the effects of Vastu. And so it is also an option to build a 2-story Vastu home and not have a hole in the 2nd story floor. So we have 2 solutions for you in this case.
I also wanted to just add that I have been in many of the 2-story homes that have the opening in the floor, not a huge opening, but some opening enough to let the light from above penetrate from the 2nd floor and the cupola area down into the 1st floor. And I've never really noticed in the rooms that there was that, you know, the noise flowing up. I think that there, you know, it's something you would have to experience on your own, and we encourage everyone to do that before they make a decision to build or to design a particular feature into the home. But I think you would find that it's not nearly as great as it seems to from looking at the pictures.
And if anyone is planning on building Vastu and they can arrange a trip to Fairfield, Iowa, where we have built 600 Maharishi Vastu homes and larger buildings, and you give us plenty of notice, we can arrange with friendly homeowners to let you experience an interior so you can check out for yourself what Susan is describing.
And actually we have many people from Europe on this call this afternoon, John. Those people could be in touch with the Rendlesham, the garden village in the United Kingdom. And there are plenty of single Vastu homes dotting in the landscape all over Europe, Italy, Germany, the Netherlands, France. I can't name all of them, but if you're in contact with your national office, they will be able to tell you, and all of the Vastu homeowners are more than willing and actually eager to show their homes to people so that you can get a real firsthand experience of what it is like.
So all of you are welcome to go to the website maharishi-vastu.org and enter this question if you are on the verge of building. And whatever country you're in, we'll steer it to the right office to see whether you can be helped.
Okay, next question. Is there any direction or recommendation for geothermal?
Yes, this is a subject that we haven't gotten into in this webinar, which is that one of the many other elements is that we understand that the various kinds of utilities that enter and leave a house and leave the Vastu have different kinds of influences depending upon where they enter and leave. And geothermal is one of them. And we would go over the options in the context of an individual consultation for anyone who wants to build a house to make sure that they are able to take advantage of this information.
Actually, it brings up a good point, John. I should just let people know that part of the consultation or our consulting services is laying out a simple Vastu site plan, which one of the things that it does is to show you and your builders what are the proper entrances into the Vastu and also into the house from all the various types of utilities.
Mm-hmm. And fear not, in most cases there are options. And so we find that generally we can work back and forth with your builder and we can find quite convenient solutions for where to bring the utilities in.
Okay, here's a question. How can you compensate for a sloping lot that delays the rays of the morning sun?
If the slope of the lot is down to the west and it is steep enough and this hill extends far enough to the east of the house, then it is correct, as Mr. Zeman proposes in his question, that it will delay sunrise on the lot. And at a certain point, it delays it too much. The only thing that can be done is, in theory, to raise grade of the site. And if we want to raise grade a couple of feet or a meter, oftentimes that can be done, at least around the house. But a greater amount is normally completely unfeasible, uneconomical, and would look peculiar. And so this is another reason why we always hope that a prospective client will contact us before they buy their lot. And we will be able to, long distance, with no need for visiting your site, help to evaluate the slope of the lot and do very precise calculations so that you can be assured as to whether it is completely feasible to build in such a way that the nourishing early morning rays of the sun will in fact fall on your lot.
Okay, here is a good question that I think relates to one of the pictures that you showed us, John, of the house in the Long Cove, the beautiful house with the open courtyard. It said, would an open courtyard be acceptable as a Brahmastan? And if so, would a fountain work in the courtyard?
We'll talk with this individual privately about the fountain in the context of their consultation. Courtyards are fabulous from the perspective of Vastu, but they can only be done if the lot is large enough and if the house is going to be large enough. And if those things are true, then it's a wonderful option. And as far as the various different categories of landscape elements that can be in a courtyard, we'd go over that with you personally regarding your own house.
Good. This man says, sorry for my English, but why do some Vastu schools recommend that the entrance is not exactly centered, but offset to the north? And Maharishi recommends that the entrance is centered, the entrance in the center of the east.
Actually, this is a very subtle point. And actually our entrances, honestly, are shifted to the north. But the shift is according to the Vedic mathematical formulas and is not so visible to the casual eye in many cases.
Okay, we've actually come to the end of the questions that have come in here, but we have many, many more. Hold on just 1 minute.
Mhm.
What kind of plants are best indicated around the Vastu?
Well, within the Vastu, we avoid thorny plants other than roses. And we encourage plants that have beautiful fragrance and that are beautiful to look at, that have beautiful flowers, both inside and out of the Vastu. We encourage that when you look out of the windows of your home, that you really see the beauties of nature. And what plants exactly will compose that for you is a matter of your specific climate and entails hundreds of different options. So we don't need to go into that any further, but I think maybe I've given you a valid general answer.
If the house is in the shape of a rectangle, is the Brahmastan still marked with a square, or does it take the rectangular shape of the house itself?
A square.
How easy is it to build a Maharishi Vastu house? Does it differ from building a non-Vastu house?
There are just a few added steps to design a Maharishi Vastu house. And as I mentioned with reference to something else, when I was speaking earlier in this call about the conversation that, at least in the United States, I will have with your builder before they are hired and they agree to build the house. I take them through the specific aspects of building Vastu that may differ a little bit from the houses that they normally build. And none of these differences are difficult or expensive for a builder. We just don't want to surprise them. And so we want them to be fully informed before they give you a price for the house. But we find that there are modest cost implications to build Vastu, but not exorbitant implications, and that the benefits hugely exceed the modest costs.
Okay, thank you, Jon.
Sure.
I would like to know the resources for paint, tile, etc., that are used in a Maharishi Vastu home. What to use, what not to use.
Well, I could speak off the cuff for an hour about materials used so that we have as much as possible natural and non-toxic materials, and even to have vapor permeable, that is breathing walls. And to overlay those things on best practices for energy efficiency and comfort. But that would bore most of you. And so I will simply say that when you build Maharishi Vastu, we give you a pretty lengthy memo that lays a lot of these things out and is a great guidance for you and your builder. And then we will answer in any amount of detail all the questions that you or the builder may have. I will also say two other specific things. One is that there are some companies around the US and in other parts of the world that specialize in providing natural and non-toxic construction materials. And there happens to be one in Fairfield. We don't have any business relationship with them, but we're still happy to give them a shout out because they sell materials to customers all over the US and I think even around the world from their very active website. And they seem to do a fantastic job. And this company is called greenbuildingsupply.com. And they have very knowledgeable consultants who will help over the phone. And between them and a few other similar vendors in other areas, it is now in this period of time quite possible to find natural materials. You asked about paints, and I'll give you a 30-second answer about paints. There are four categories of paints. There are conventional paints, which in the US are now low VOC. A better category is zero VOC paints, and all the major paint manufacturers for a small premium will sell you zero VOC paints. That's a little better. To go better than that is to use paints that were specifically formulated for people who are chemically sensitive, though they may still be composed of industrial and synthetic materials. And one company that is a standout in that category is called AFM, and their paints are available from Green Building Supply or online. And the highest standard is to use paints that are made completely of natural materials. The companies that make these are most typically based in Europe, though there is at least one very good company in the US. And I will mention just one of those companies, not to distinguish it, but to give an example, and that is Livos, L-I-V-O-S.
Good. Here's another one. Sorry, I've got so many screens open, everyone, that I have to go back and forth between questions on one screen and questions on another. Is it helpful to read the Vedic texts on Vastu?
Yes and no. What do I mean by that? It is nourishing, it is evolutionary to read the Vedic literature, and that includes the texts on Vastu, such as Manasara and Mayamata. It is evolutionary for us to have that connection to the Vedic literature by reading it. However, I do not really promote analyzing the Vedic literature to derive rules to practice for the construction of one's Vastu home. There are multiple reasons why I say that. Number one, if you read these texts, you'll find that they're very confusing and that they refer to technical terms in Sanskrit or whatever the original language was, Malayalam, for example, that are not translated. And you don't really know what those things are. And they also refer to construction processes that are not common today and therefore are at best mysterious. And also because you will inevitably, unless you're fluent in, say, Sanskrit or Malayalam, you'll be reading them in translation. And then you will be suffering from unknowingly any errors that the translator made. And there is one widely available translation of one of the two major texts, which got some of the cardinal directions wrong in a couple of places. That's a big translator's error. And so this is why when Maharishi spent 20 years focused on identifying what the correct Vedic practice is of Vastu, that as an outcome of that process, which he had to do because there are multiple traditions of Vastu architects across India, and each of these traditions has their own opinions, and some of them contradict each other. And certainly, you know, if you look online, entries on Vastu, you'll find a whole potpourri of different recommendations, and how do you wade through them and make decisions? Well, we are blessed, we're very fortunate that an enlightened individual in this generation did that for us and identified what the correct meaning of the Vedic literature is and what the correct application is. And that information is transmitted to you by a very highly trained Maharishi Vastu architect or Maharishi Vastu consultant who can work with your own architect. So that's actually the safest way to make use of the Vedic literature on Vastu.
Okay, here's an interesting question. What can be the recommendations for construction of Vastu homes in areas close to the Arctic Circle?
Well, most of the principles are unaffected by that. if you're really, really, well, and we have built Vastu homes in Finland and in Sweden. And so we've gotten pretty close to the Arctic Circle. And there were no modifications of the application of the principles in those cases. If somebody purchases the North Pole or the South Pole and wants to build a house on it, I think we'll have to think very carefully with them in those cases. But as close to the Arctic Circle as one is likely to build, it's not an issue.
Thank goodness. How does the Brahmastan work with a full basement?
Well, the ideal way to build is not to have a basement. For the floor, the ground floor of the house to be resting only on solid matter going all the way down deep into the earth. That's the ideal. And we strongly encourage that. But it is also true, certainly in the United States, where this call originates in particular, that it is very common to have either crawl spaces or basements under a house. And we don't prohibit that. Now, the direct answer to your question is that we mark the Brahmastan on the floor of that main ground, or in the United States, we say that first floor of the house, not in the basement.
Good, thank you. Here's a question. I got the impression somewhere that Maharishi Vastu gives life to the Meissner Effect, such that homes might be protected against natural disasters. I'm wondering if this can be addressed and clarified for truthfulness.
The Meissner Effect, and I don't want to give a long answer, is a term in physics that refers to the circumstance in which a piece of iron is supercooled. And what we find at that time is that if you put it in proximity to a magnet, that the magnetic field will not penetrate that piece of iron, which it, of course, will do to a piece of iron that's at room temperature. There are other similar phenomena in other areas of physics, which we can describe in general by saying that when the elements of a structure become aligned with each other, which is what happens when iron is supercooled, then the structure repels some incoherent outside influences. We don't use the term Meissner Effect to refer to an individual Vastu house, but we do refer to a parallel when you build an entire Vastu community, because it is then, the structure is the community, and it is composed by coherent, aligned particles, which in this case are the individual houses and other buildings. And what Maharishi has proposed is that in that case, there is a kind of invincibility which is gained within the community, and negative outside influences are much, much less likely to penetrate. This, we can say, is Maharishi's proposal, and it's not really something that we figured out how to test objectively and in a placebo-proof experimental model. So we kind of take it on faith. I will say that anecdotally, we have encountered many, many circumstances in which there was some natural disaster in proximity to collections of Maharishi Vastu buildings, such as forest fires. And it seems as though we do, based on those circumstances, have some added safety by being in Vastu, especially by being in a Vastu community. But what the full range is, the power of the, what we can call the Maharishi Vastu effect, has never been probed scientifically. And so all we can say is that I'd rather be in Vastu than outside of Vastu. And I'd certainly rather be in a Vastu community as I am than not.
Thanks, John. I also would like to just mention that people, if they're interested in some of these anecdotal stories, that they look at our website, maharshivastu.org/testimonials. And there are 3 or 4 different tabs on that home page. And the one that says protective influences is the one that actually relates the stories of people who have had this experience.
And it's not that Vastu prevents karma. And so if we have a body, we do have karma. But it may be, and here we're just speculating, it may have some degree of a mitigating influence. Certainly, what I can say is that we do find as a strong rule that our lives are smoother, happier, and feel more supported when we live in Vastu.
I think this next question, John, kind of also continues in that same vein. This person is asking for tips on how one can intuitively feel the space, feeling what is off, what is right. What kind of feeling should one distinguish as bad or positive? It would mean a great deal to be able to confirm with yourself the Vastu knowledge, the how with the feeling the why, and distinguishing. What helps also to be able to perceive these subtle energies more clearly?
I have 2 kinds of answers to that question. The first is that developing our intuition is one of the goals of evolution in life. And we recommend any practices that develop intuition, and most emphatically, above all, we recommend that to have this outcome, that one learn the Transcendental Meditation technique by going to a certified TM teacher available in major cities all over the world and taking the 4-day course. And 2 hours a day, it's not 4 full days. And what almost universally is experienced is that over time, the longer that we practice this very powerful, effective, and pure traditional form of meditation, the greater our intuition grows. So that's one answer, and I encourage everyone to do this. But the second thing that I will say is that many of us are quite far from being enlightened, and so our intuition can be very incomplete. And therefore, our feelings about things can be somewhat illusory. And therefore, we do not suggest that one be guided specifically by feelings to assess the Vastu quality of a house. This is why Maharishi spent so many years reconstructing this knowledge so that Vastu could be practiced very precisely and completely according to the important elements of the Vedic literature. And so if we can obtain a Maharishi Vastu house, then we can know intellectually that the influence of it is very nourishing.
Okay. How can this science be brought mainstream?
What a wonderful question. And that's what has to happen. Everybody lives in a house or an apartment building, almost everyone in the world, certainly everybody in the developed world. And all of these houses and apartment buildings and office buildings have real influences upon the lives of the people. And we want those influences to be nourishing. Most of us go through our entire lives never building or having built a home for ourselves. It is the developers and the large-scale builders who are responsible for the construction of most of the homes and apartment buildings in the world. So the most valuable thing for us to do is to speak to them, to speak to those people who, with a single decision, can provide Vastu housing for tens or hundreds or thousands of people. And so this is actually the most important thing that I do with my time. And I have meetings scheduled right now with large developers in various states across the United States to discuss Vastu projects. And I encourage all of you who are on the phone call on this webinar that if you yourself are builders or developers, please contact us and we will discuss with you what the possibilities are so that you can bring real fulfillment, real happiness, real nourishment to your clients. And if you have close associates who are developers or builders on some scale, feel free to encourage us and them to be in touch with each other so that we can inspire them also. Because, you know, large builders and developers are all looking for the way to distinguish their projects from the competition's projects by creating amenities that the people will find more fulfilling than the amenities in the competitors' projects. And there is no amenity which is as fulfilling, as nourishing, as compelling as living or working in Maharishi Vastu. This is the ultimate amenity, the ultimate way of distinguishing one developer or builder's project from the next and bringing even financial success to them, as well as nourishment to the people.
Okay, I think we've concluded for the evening, Jon. We'll see you very soon. Hope you've enjoyed the afternoon.
Bye-bye.